annual charity gala at the Fairmont Grand Hotel was an event of unparalleled grandeur, drawing some of the most influential figures from business, entertainment, and journalism. The ballroom was a sight to behold, illuminated by the glow of crystal chandeliers reflecting off polished marble floors, the air filled with the soft murmur of conversation and the delicate notes of a string quartet playing in the background. This prestigious gathering was organized to support a foundation dedicated to helping underprivileged youth. And while the evening carried a philanthropic mission, it was also a social spectacle, where the elite came together to network, celebrate, and be seen. Among the attendees, dressed in their finest attire, was a young man who stood apart from the rest, not because he sought attention, but because his presence alone commanded it. Barron Trump, just 18 years old, sat toward the back of the room in an unassuming corner, a quiet observer rather than an active participant in the night's festivities. Unlike the other guests, many of whom thrived in the spotlight, he seemed content to remain in the background, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room with a calmness beyond his years. He had been invited by a family friend, a subtle attempt to introduce him to a different social circle, but rather than engaging in the lively conversations around him, he chose to watch, taking in the evening's unfolding dynamics with an air of quiet introspection. Despite his youth, Barron's tall frame and composed demeanor made him stand out, a stark contrast to the more animated guests who reveled in the glamour of the occasion. The event proceeded smoothly, waiters gliding effortlessly through the room, serving champagne and exquisitely crafted hors d'oeuvres, the clinking of glasses and bursts of laughter adding to the evening's celebratory ambiance. However, beneath the surface of polished smiles and exchanged pleasantries, there was an undeniable undercurrent of anticipation as the moment everyone had been waiting for approached. The highlight of the night was the keynote speech, a tradition at the gala where a distinguished guest would take the stage to share insights, challenge perspectives, and leave the audience with something to think about. This year's speaker had been announced weeks in advance, and the anticipation surrounding their address was palpable. Known for their sharp wit, unapologetic commentary, and controversial takes on political and social issues, the journalist selected for the evening was both admired and criticized in equal measure. As the time for the speech drew near, the atmosphere shifted ever so slightly, conversations dwindling as guests turned their attention toward the stage. Barron, ever the observer, leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable as he prepared to listen. The master of ceremonies stepped forward, microphone in hand, and with a charismatic smile introduced the night's speaker. The audience responded with polite applause, but there was an unspoken tension in the air, an expectation that the speech would not merely entertain, but provoke. No one could have predicted, however, just how much it would push boundaries and how one individual's response would ultimately steal the spotlight in a way no one had foreseen. The moment the journalist took the stage, the energy in the room shifted, a collective anticipation settling over the crowd as all eyes focused on the sleekly dressed figure standing confidently at the podium. This was a speaker known for their razor-sharp wit, a media personality both revered and reviled for their unapologetic takes on politics and culture. Their reputation preceded them, and while some in the audience welcomed the prospect of a speech filled with bold insights and cutting humor, others braced themselves, knowing that this journalist had never been one to shy away from controversy. They began with ease, their tone conversational, laced with charm as they delivered an opening monologue filled with light-hearted banter. Jokes about the city's notorious traffic woes drew chuckles, as did an anecdote about a Champagne Tower disaster at a previous gala, setting a relaxed and engaging atmosphere. For a brief moment, it felt like any other high-profile event, polished and predictable, the audience willing to indulge in the carefully curated humor that kept things flowing smoothly. However, the tone began to shift gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, as the journalist transitioned from harmless observations to more pointed political commentary. They began referencing well-known figures, teasing their quirks and public blunders, drawing sporadic laughter from those who found amusement in the cleverly crafted jabs. Yet, as the speech moved deeper into the realm of politics, the humor became sharper, less playful, more biting. The name of Donald Trump inevitably surfaced, met with a mix of reactions, some laughs, some knowing smirks, and a few tightened expressions from those who had grown weary of political satire. "Well, we can't talk about the state of the world without mentioning the man who made orange the new black," the journalist quipped, pausing to allow the scattered laughter to settle before continuing. "Love him or hate him, you have to admit he's the gift that keeps on giving for people like me." Some in the audience laughed freely, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Barron Trump, seated quietly at his table, remained still, his expression unreadable, his posture unchanged. If the journalist was aware of his presence, they gave no indication, pressing forward with their routine, each joke landing with increasing sharpness. The policies, the infamous tweets, the public appearances, nothing was off limits, and for a time the audience seemed divided between those reveling in the irreverence and those who sensed a growing discomfort in the air. And then, the moment that no one had anticipated arrived. The journalists paused, a smirk playing at the corners of their lips, and with a deliberate shift in tone, they delivered a line that sent an almost audible ripple through the room. "And of course," they said, their voice carrying a playful lilt, "we can't forget his most overlooked legacy, the next generation. I mean, let's talk about Barron." A collective gasp, subtle but unmistakable, swept across the audience as heads instinctively turned toward the young man at the back of the room. Until this point, the jokes had remained safely within the realm of political critique, but now the spotlight had landed on Barron, unasked for and unwelcomed. The journalists pressed on, their tones still playful, but the words laced with an edge. "Imagine growing up in a golden tower, surrounded by marble everything, while your dad is out there tweeting about Kofefi, while the rest of us are just trying to survive Monday mornings. That must have been character building." A few scattered chuckles echoed through the room, but they were hesitant, nervous, lacking the confidence of the laughter that had filled the space earlier. Most people sat in stunned silence, their smiles fading, their eyes darting between Barron and the journalists, sensing the palpable shift in the room's energy. For the first time that evening, the journalists seemed to sense that they might have miscalculated. Barron, however, did not flinch. He did not shift in his chair, nor did he cast his gaze downward or attempt to shrink into the background. He remained exactly as he had been, calm, composed. His silence spoke louder than any outburst could, amplifying the weight of the words that had just been spoken. The journalist, perhaps expecting a laugh, a dismissive smirk, or even visible discomfort, was met instead with an unwavering, quiet defiance. The stillness in the room was deafening, an unspoken recognition that a line had been crossed, even if some could not immediately articulate why. The journalist, attempting to regain control of the moment, forced a chuckle into the microphone. "Tough crowd," they muttered, but the self-assured smirk from earlier had faded slightly, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. The laughter they had expected had not arrived, and in its absence, the weight of the situation became all the more pronounced. The tension now sat thick in the air, an invisible force pressing down on the audience, making it clear that what had begun as an evening of wit and entertainment had now veered into something entirely different. And then, Barron moved. The moment the journalist's joke landed, the room held its breath, all eyes instinctively shifting toward Barron Trump, waiting, watching, anticipating some kind of reaction. Yet he did not flinch, did not shift in his chair, did not show even the faintest sign of discomfort or anger. Instead, he remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable, his posture composed, exuding an eerie sense of calm that stood in stark contrast to the palpable tension tightening around the room. His hands rested lightly on the edge of the table, his gaze steady, his silence stretching into something more powerful than any verbal retort could have been. The absence of reaction became the reaction itself, a quiet defiance that unsettled even those who had initially chuckled at the remark. Uneasy glances were exchanged between attendees, the once lively energy of the gala now reduced to an almost unbearable stillness, as if the entire room had become aware all at once of the weight of what had just been said. Even the journalist, whose confidence had radiated so effortlessly only moments ago, seemed momentarily caught off guard, their smirk faltering as they scanned the crowd, perhaps realizing that the audience was no longer fully on their side. The tension deepened with each second that Barron remained motionless, an unspoken challenge lingering in the air, not one of aggression, but of quiet strength, an unshakable resolve that made it clear he was not going to play into the spectacle. The journalist, sensing the shift, attempted to lighten the mood, muttering a dry, tough crowd into the microphone, but the humor fell flat, the remark met with nothing but deafening silence. The room, once buzzing with conversation and laughter, now felt frozen, suspended in a moment that no one had anticipated. Slowly, deliberately, Barron pushed back his chair, the soft scrape of the legs against the polished floor cutting through the stillness like a knife. His tall frame unfolded as he stood, an imposing figure despite his youth, his presence commanding attention in a way that had nothing to do with his last name and everything to do with the unshakable poise with which he carried himself. Without hesitation, he took a step forward, then another, moving toward the stage with a measured pace, his expression betraying nothing, his movements deliberate, his posture straight and unwavering. The journalist, who had spent their career controlling rooms with words, now stood frozen in place, their earlier confidence evaporating as the young man they had just turned into a punchline approached. The audience, their breaths collectively held, sat motionless, eyes wide with anticipation, knowing that whatever happened next would be something they would never forget. As Barron Trump reached the edge of the stage, the weight of the moment settled over the room, the tension thick enough to silence even the faintest whispers. Every eye followed him, drawn in by the quiet authority he exuded, an unexpected presence that commanded attention without demand. The journalist, who moments ago had owned the stage with confidence and charisma, now stood motionless, their expression unreadable, yet betraying the slightest flicker of uncertainty. The audience, once entertained by the wit and sharp remarks that had punctuated the evening, now sat in stunned anticipation, unsure of what would come next. Then, in a voice steady and deliberate, Barron spoke. "Thank you for your insight," he began, his tone devoid of sarcasm or malice, the sheer composure of his words disarming in its unexpected grace. A pause followed, stretching just long enough for the journalist and the audience alike to register the weight of what he had just said. There was no anger, no defensiveness, no attempt to lash out. Instead, there was an eerie sense of control, as if Barron had seized the narrative without ever having to fight for it. He took another measured breath before continuing, his eyes locking onto the journalist, his voice unwavering. "I've grown up watching people make assumptions about me, my family, and my life," he said, his words carrying the kind of weight that could not be dismissed. "It's almost become a game to some, a way to fill in the gaps when they don't know the full story. And I get it. We're public figures, it comes with the territory." His calm acknowledgement of his position in the public eye only served to amplify the gravity of what followed. The audience remained entranced, their collective discomfort now morphing into something else entirely, an admiration for the poise and depth of understanding radiating from someone so young. Even those who had chuckled at the joke now sat motionless, their earlier amusement replaced with reflection. But Barron was not finished. "What often gets overlooked," he continued, his voice now carrying a quiet intensity, "is that behind every headline, behind every punchline, there's a human being. Someone with their own struggles, their own dreams, and their own story. You may think you know me because of who my father is, but you don't. Not really." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. At the podium, the journalists visibly shifted, gripping the edge slightly tighter, their confident facade beginning to crack under the weight of the moment. It was not an attack. Barron had not raised his voice, had not fired back with sharp words or hostility, but it was a mirror reflecting back the consequences of words spoken without consideration. The realization settled over the room like a slow-moving wave, an unspoken acknowledgement that what had started as a moment of satire had transformed into something else entirely. Barron took a step back now, not toward retreat, but toward resolution, his gaze shifting from the journalist to the audience itself, addressing not just the individual on stage, but every person in the room. "What I've learned," he said, his voice unwavering, "is that respect shouldn't have to be earned. It should be given freely, especially when you don't know someone's story." A murmur rippled through the audience, a quiet acknowledgement of the wisdom laced within his words. He continued, his presence now filling the room in a way that no amount of celebrity status or public scrutiny ever could. "We live in a time where it's easy to tear each other down," he said, "where words are often used as weapons rather than bridges. But words have power. They can hurt or they can heal. They can divide or they can unite. And I think we could all use a little more of the latter." The journalist, now standing in stark contrast to the young man before them, looked down briefly, an unspoken understanding flickering in their eyes. There was no longer a battle of wits or dominance. It had ceased to be about humor or reputation long ago. It was now about something much larger, something Barron had tapped into without needing to raise his voice or retaliate with cruelty. He turned slightly then, his final words directed just as much at the audience as at the journalist. "I hope this gives you something to think about." It was not a plea nor a reprimand. It was simply a statement, one that carried more weight than anything that had preceded it. And then, with the same quiet dignity that had marked his entire response, Barron turned and walked back to his seat, the only sound in the room the soft clicks of his shoes against the polished floor. The audience remained frozen for a moment longer, suspended in the gravity of what had just occurred. And then, as realization set in, the first clap rang out, a single acknowledgement that soon cascaded into an eruption of applause that filled every corner of the ballroom. But Barron, seated once more, did not bask in it. He simply nodded politely to those around him, his composure unchanged, as if he had simply done what needed to be done. The applause started hesitantly, a single clap from somewhere near the front of the room, but within seconds it swelled into a thunderous standing ovation that filled the grand ballroom, reverberating against the chandeliers and polished marble floors. Attendees who had moments ago been shifting uncomfortably in their seats now stood in unison, their admiration undeniable, their applause not just for the words Barron had spoken, but for the grace with which he had delivered them. Some clapped with genuine appreciation for his composure, while others, perhaps recognizing the awkwardness that had blanketed the room just minutes before, joined in as a form of redemption, an acknowledgement that they had at least initially entertained the journalist's misguided humor. The journalists, still standing at the podium, attempted to maintain their composure, forcing a tight-lipped smile as they glanced around the room, but the shift in energy was undeniable. They had lost control of the moment, and they knew it. The evening had started as theirs to command, their words meant to be the focal point, their humor the guiding force of the night. But now the power had shifted entirely, and it belonged, without question, to the young man who had spoken with a quiet authority beyond his years. For the first time, the journalists looked visibly uncomfortable, their previous confidence drained as the applause continued. Perhaps they had underestimated Barron, assuming that, like most individuals in the public eye, he would either laugh it off or recoil in discomfort. Instead, he had done something neither they nor anyone else had expected. He had responded not with anger, not with retreat, but with wisdom and restraint, transforming what could have been an embarrassing moment into an inspiring one. As the applause eventually began to die down, Barron remained composed, offering only a polite nod to those who acknowledged him, his face betraying no sign of pride or triumph. He had said what needed to be said, and now, as far as he was concerned, the moment was over. But outside the walls of the Fairmont Grand Hotel, it was just beginning. Within hours, clips of Barron's speech began circulating on social media, snippets of his words shared across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, accompanied by captions ranging from admiration to disbelief. "Barron Trump just schooled an entire room on class and respect," read one viral tweet, while another, shared by a prominent celebrity in attendance, stated, "No matter what you think of his family, this young man just gave us all something to think about." News outlets quickly picked up the story, some praising Barron for his maturity and poise, calling it a defining moment for someone who had spent much of his life in the shadow of public scrutiny. Others turned their focus to the journalists, debating the ethics of their remarks and whether public figures, especially young ones, should ever be fair game for such jokes. The journalists, aware of the growing backlash, issued a carefully worded statement the next morning, acknowledging their misstep. "Comedy and commentary are powerful tools," they wrote, "but they must be wielded responsibly. Last night I crossed a line, and I apologized to Barron Trump for my remarks." But not everyone was quick to accept the apology. The online discourse that followed was relentless, with some defending the journalist's right to satire, while others condemned them for what they saw as an unnecessary and inappropriate attack on someone who had done nothing to warrant being singled out. Talk shows, podcasts, and online forums buzzed with heated debates about the incident, some framing Barron's response as a much-needed call for civility in an increasingly polarized world, while others saw it as a poignant reminder that even those in the public eye deserve to be treated with dignity. But amidst all the noise, Barron himself remained notably absent from the conversation. Those close to him said he barely acknowledged the frenzy of attention surrounding the moment, choosing instead to return to his daily life with the same quiet dignity that had defined his response at the gala. He did not engage in the discussions, did not offer follow-up statements, did not seek to capitalize on the viral attention. Instead, he simply moved forward, leaving the world to draw its own conclusions about what had transpired that night. Yet, while he may have moved on, the lessons from that evening lingered, sparking conversations far beyond the ballroom where they had begun. As the dust settled from the gala, its impact continued to ripple far beyond that single evening, sparking discussions in homes, classrooms, and media circles alike. What had started as an ill-conceived attempt at humor had transformed into a powerful lesson on dignity, restraint, and the weight of words. Barron Trump's response was more than just a moment of personal composure. It became a reflection of how one's reaction to provocation can define the narrative far more than the provocation itself. In a world increasingly driven by outrage, where social media rewards instant emotionally charged responses, his choice to respond with grace and thoughtfulness stood out as a rare and refreshing anomaly. His ability to face criticism without retaliating in anger sent a message that resonated deeply. Respect is not a commodity to be earned, but something that should be freely given, even in the face of adversity. The gala incident also served as a reminder of the power words hold, not just to entertain, but to wound, to dehumanize, and to reduce individuals to caricatures based on assumptions rather than reality. Parents used Barron's speech as a teaching moment for their children, educators incorporated it into discussions on respect and empathy, and thought leaders reflected on how public discourse often prioritizes spectacle over substance, yet perhaps the most profound impact of the night was its ability to momentarily bridge divides. For once, political affiliations became secondary to a shared recognition of dignity and character. It was not about Barron's last name, nor his father's legacy. It was about the simple truth that no one, regardless of status, deserves to be stripped of their humanity for the sake of a laugh. Through his actions, Barron reminded the world that real strength lies not in how loudly one responds, but in how one chooses to rise above. In life, moments of adversity often test our character, revealing not only who we are, but also the values we choose to uphold. Barron Trump's response to public ridicule serves as a profound lesson in dignity, patience, and the power of measured words. An example that resonates deeply, particularly for those who have lived long enough to understand that wisdom often lies in silence rather than confrontation. His decision to rise above personal attacks, refusing to meet disrespect with anger, reminds us that true strength is not found in retaliation but in composure. As we navigate a world increasingly shaped by loud voices, quick judgments, and a culture of division, there is immense value in pausing before we react, in choosing grace when provoked, and in understanding that not every battle is worth engaging. Older generations who have witnessed the evolution of society through decades of change can appreciate the importance of respectful discourse and the consequences of words spoken without thought. We live in a time when people are quick to criticize, slow to listen, and often forget that behind every name, every headline, and every public figure is a human being with their own struggles and aspirations. This event serves as a reminder that humility and respect should never be forgotten, no matter how justified one may feel in their opinions. It is easy to tear others down, but it takes wisdom to lift a conversation to a place of understanding rather than destruction. By choosing to respond with kindness and perspective, we do more than just protect our own dignity. We set an example for those around us, particularly the younger generation, who will inherit the world we leave behind. We must ask ourselves, do we use our words to build or to break? Do we allow anger to dictate our responses, or do we show restraint, knowing that dignity is often best preserved in silence? The lessons of this story are timeless and universal, applicable not just to public figures but to our everyday lives, from interactions with family and friends to how we engage in community discussions. Respect, after all, is not something to be selectively applied but a principle that should guide us in all aspects of life. If there is one takeaway from Barron's response, it is this. In a world that often mistakes volume for wisdom, sometimes the most powerful statement is a calm and thoughtful one.